When I was 9 years old, my mother gave me a present. She had put together a book of poems for me. There were about 15 or so that she had written out by hand. She made a cover out of blue construction paper with a yellow and white paper flower glued on it. She asked that I memorize a poem for her on Mother's Day. And so it became a tradition for me to memorize a poem and recite it for her each year on special occasions. The poems that she included reflected my mother's sense of whimsy and her intelligence. She liked E.E. Cummings. Her favorite was the 1L Llama, he's a priest, the 2L Llama, he's a beast, and I will bet my silk pajama there's no such thing as a 3L Llama. She was funny, but she also had good taste, and so I memorized Carl Sandburg, Emerson, T.S. Eliot, Emily Dickinson, and tucked in there, in between these whimsical gems, was an unusual choice, one that I gravitated to as a child, and one that has puzzled me as an adult. It's a poem called Keep a Goin' by the great poet Frank Lebby Stanton, and it goes like this. If you strike a thorn or a rose, keep a goin'. If it hails or if it snows, keep a goin'. 'Tain't no use to sit and whine when the fish ain't on your line. Bait your hook and keep a tryin', keep a goin'. When the weather kills your crop, keep a goin'. When you tumble from the top, keep a goin'. Keep a goin'. Suppose you're out of every dime, bein' so ain't any crime. Tell the world you're feelin' prime, keep a goin'. Out of all the precious poems in that precious book, this one was always special to me. The sentiment of that poem is very much the idea behind the readings that we heard this morning. Our gospel readings for this week and next come from the farewell discourse. Discourses by Jesus are found throughout the Gospel of John, but this one has a significant difference. The others are given to interpret and explain something that had already happened. This one is given preparation for the coming events of his death, resurrection, and ascension. Of course, because of the way we read the lessons in church, what Jesus is preparing his disciples for, we have experienced, at least within the church year, already. So Jesus is preparing his disciples for a time in which they will be discouraged. Do not let your hearts be troubled, he says. And we now know what his disciples would soon know, that there is much to find troubling. We are now facing hardships as a state, as a nation, and as a world that we could not have imagined even a few months ago. But as troubling as these numbers and statistics can be, we must never forget that these numbers represent real personal tragedies, individual lives, grandfathers and grandmothers, mothers and fathers, children. The number of people whose families has been touched is growing every day. If you haven't lost anyone close to you yet, perhaps you have room to hold in your hearts the father of a girl who went to the New York Summer Youth Conference with me for many years. Last week, she lost her father, who had spent more than a month in a New York City hospital. Or consider St. Luke's Episcopal Parish in the Bronx, which is led finally by my very dear friend, Father Duvere. They have lost many, many precious souls. One of them was my friend, a man named Donald Booker, a longtime leader in the parish and in the diocese. He was a gentleman and a fighter for his community. He lost his life to COVID last month. A family in our own church lost a sister, an aunt, last month. She lived in Brooklyn and died in her apartment, afraid to go to the hospital because she didn't know what she had and didn't want to risk being infected, or worse, infecting someone else. These waves of loss can make us numb to grief, or that grief can swell into anger when we hear our friends in other parts of the country glibly suggest that maybe this is all a hoax designed by the government or a tech company or by the liberal media to keep us all home. Do not let your hearts be troubled, Jesus tells us, no matter how much your heart hurts. Do not be troubled by misfortune, because nothing that we suffer changes our fundamental relationship with God. In my Father's house, there are many dwelling places. The word for house in the original Greek is oika. This can be translated in two ways. One is a physical house, and we sometimes interpret that to mean a celestial home. In fact, this text is often used at funerals to suggest that the Father's house is in heaven, a permanent residence where all believers will live together forever. The second way that you can translate oika is household. In other words, instead of a physical place, you can translate this to mean a permanent and enduring relationship, the kind between a father and son, the kind of relationship that the Father shares with the Son will now be the relationship between us and the Father. In the New Interpreter's Bible commentary on John, O'Day writes, Jesus uses the domestic imagery to say, my return to God will make it possible for you to join in the relationship that the Father and I share. Given this understanding, the place Jesus is preparing is not a spot in a physical dwelling, but a place in God's family, a place where one can be related to and remain with the Father as closely as Jesus, the Son, does. This rootedness in connection to God is, I believe, where the words of assurance are found in this gospel. No matter where we are called to go, no matter what misfortunes we must face, nothing can break our relationship with God. Because our relationship to God is not dependent upon us being good enough or smart enough or strong enough. Our relationship to God is as strong and durable and intimate as a family. It is written in our bodies as surely as is our DNA. You and I are children of God. And no matter what dangers we face, no matter how isolated or weak we feel, we are bound together by God's love, held up on our weakest days by the strength of the Lord, who has promised never to let us be alone. This is what Jesus wanted us to remember most in his farewell discourse, to take out of the drawer when we are feeling weak or alone, to memorize, to recite, to write on our palms, and in the great words of the collect, to read, mark, and inwardly digest the message that he suspected one day we would need to hear the most. Don't ever give up. Don't ever forget that you are loved, that you belong to God, that you have a greater purpose than the dangers of this moment. Keep a going, keep a going, keep a going. Amen.